It just breaks my heart to think of how much pain he has lived with. But he's starting to really address that pain and his perspectives.
You're a totally different person, and it's evil, and it takes you over. It's like a darkness that takes you over.
I'm a mother, and I'm a wife, and my little boy needs me. My parents didn't raise me this way at all. I know somewhere deep down that I'm better than this, but at the same time, when my addiction takes hold of me, I don't care about anything but that addiction.
Welcome to the 100th episode of Grieving Out Loud. I'm Kennecke. This week we're celebrating a milestone here at the Emily's Hope podcast. It all started in April of 2019 as I was approaching the 1-year anniversary of my daughter Emily's death from fentanyl poison. I decided to put out a podcast to let other families know they're not alone in dealing with addiction, loss, and grief. In my very first episode, I talked about the day I lost my daughter, the day I posted on Instagram before her death that beauty is all around us.
I'm going to tell you this story now so that later I can tell you about her life and about how I've been coping with her loss. The latest chapter in my life began on May 16th. It was one of those spring days, the kind you only get a handful of, especially in South Dakota. There were blossoms on the trees. That white cotton filled the air. Flowers were starting to bloom. I took some pictures, put them on my Instagram story of the blooming trees, and I wrote, "Beauty is all around us." Little did I know, several hours later, my whole world would come crashing down upon me. It was a pretty normal day at work, but there was one odd thing about it. I was working on a story on overdoses, specifically Good Samaritan laws and overdoses, and how when people overdose in a group setting partying with friends, the Good Samaritan laws come into play. If they call for help, the other people won't get arrested. And it wasn't unusual for me to be working on a story on the opioid crisis. I'd done a lot of them for the past couple of years, and I knew there was a problem with my daughter. I just didn't know what. Ironically, we were planning an intervention because she just seemed out of it and things didn't seem right and her life wasn't going in the direction that it should have been. And I'd confronted her over and over and over again, and she'd always said, "No, I don't have anything wrong," and denied. I knew about the marijuana. That was pretty obvious. And I'd later learned about some pills in the benzo class, like Xanax. But she swore to me she'd gotten off of those. I had no idea about the opioids. None whatsoever. So as I was working on this story on the opioid crisis, I really wasn't thinking that my daughter would die of an opioid overdose. I was thinking that something was wrong with her, and that she wouldn't tell us about it, and that we needed to get her help. And I was scared, because a few days earlier I had learned that one of her friends had died of an overdose. I was leaving work, and I thought, wouldn't it be great if we could go hiking together? So I text her, "Want to go hiking at Good Earth State Park?" No response. I called her. No answer. Now this was unusual. Emily had always called me right away or texted me back because she knew I worried about her. But I told myself not to panic, and I waited a little bit, and I went home and had dinner with my family. And then I decided, since I hadn't heard back from Emily, that she must be with her friends, and I went to Costco to buy flowers to plant in my pots. Leaving Costco, I got a phone call. It was from her dad. He spoke in a tone I'd never heard before. "Emily's OD'd," he said. "I think she's dead." My mind reeled. Huh? What? I don't remember hanging up the phone. I don't remember starting the car. I do remember driving the wrong way, in the wrong direction, not toward Emily's apartment. Turned around and drove as fast as I could. I got there, and outside was parked an ambulance, and people had gathered. A couple of police cars. The side door to the apartment was open. I ran upstairs, as fast as I could, skipping steps. People seemed to be everywhere, in the hallways, on the stairway. I didn't see any of their faces. As I approached her apartment, there was a police officer standing out front in the hallway, just outside the door. He tried to block me. I said something I'd never said before. In my 30 years of being on television, I had never used this line. "Don't you know who I am?" I said. "I know who you are," he said, "but you're not getting in there." Suddenly, someone made a noise and he was distracted. He turned his head and I bolted on by him. I rushed into the apartment. There were emergency personnel everywhere, firefighters, EMTs, police officers. Emily's dad, my ex-husband, was standing in the living room. I can't even describe the look on his face. Tears streaming down his cheeks. I turned toward her room, where a group of EMTs were working on her. I asked, "Are there any vitals?" They had her hooked up to a machine. They said, "We're breathing for her." No vitals. I dropped to my knees. I started to pray and pray. For all I knew, I was praying out loud. People were all around me and I didn't care. But 30 minutes later, a man emerged from the bedroom. I think he was a firefighter. And he said, "We can't save her. There's nothing more we can do." That was the night my daughter died.
I can't bring my daughter back, but I can bring awareness to the deadly drug epidemic. Awareness I hope will prevent other parents from experiencing the same kind of grief. I went on to interview so many parents and experts in the field of addiction, as well as grief. This week, we're bringing you the highlights from the last 4 years and 100 episodes.
As a society, need to say, yeah, this is killing our best and our brightest. This is affecting 20 or more % of our population. We need to accept it, and we need to address it, and we need to all get behind it.
That was Dr. Matt Stanley, a psychiatrist who specializes in addiction care. I spoke with him in a podcast titled Addiction is a Disease. Everyone needs to hear this message so we can stop the stigma surrounding substance use disorder and get more people the help they need. Can you explain to people why and how addiction is a disease?
Yeah, I think maybe the easiest thing for people to kind of accept is when we compare it to other chronic diseases. So addiction, much like diabetes, which is a disease we often use as a comparator, addiction is genetically driven. Physiologic changes occur at the receptor level. We have a bunch of neurochemicals in the brain that are affected. It really is the physiology of the body that begins to dictate the addiction. I think where people get really hung up is they feel like this is a disease of choice.
A moral failing.
A moral failing. And like many illnesses, we as people who care about the people with addictions get really frustrated, get really angry. And I think sometimes that anger is expressed by saying, you need to control this. This is a moral problem. This is a weakness of character. But on the other hand, if you look again at that diagnosis of diabetes, much of that is developed through lifestyle, exercise, but it's very genetic, it's very powerful, and there are changes you have to commit to be able to manage that.
I think some of the problem that some people have is that with diabetes, the choice may be eating the wrong food, where with addiction, the choice may be using an illegal drug. So this is something people are like, well, why did you ever use that in the first place? Or once you used it, why did you keep using it?
Right. And again, I think it's understanding that with our genetics and the power of neurochemicals, one exposure can really just flip a switch that's almost, I won't say impossible, because many, many people have overcome tremendously difficult addictions. I don't know how to describe when addicts tell you when the light goes on, the first time they have this, how they feel. It's just like everything in the world is right. All of a sudden, I know it's been missing. It's a powerful, powerful neurochemical reaction.
It just hooks you, and after that, you keep using because you like it. It's fun and exciting, and you feel different. And then all of a sudden, you're starting to not feel so good because you need it.
Megan Ihacker grew up on a farm near a small town in South Dakota. She's not necessarily the person you would think would have substance use disorder.
I ended up getting into drugs, and I would see all my friends and classmates, that they're succeeding. They got that college degree.
They passed you by.
Yeah. And
they went on with their lives, and your life was stuck in this cycle of probably getting high and getting sick, right?
Absolutely. And I was embarrassed, and I just didn't even want to face that. So let's just get high again.
Get high to avoid
I don't
having
want
to
to
think
face
about it.
this. Let's just get high, because when you get high, you have no problem. Everything's just okay.
Thankfully, Megan is now in recovery. She's offering hope to others battling an addiction.
Never give up on your loved one. Never give up on them. Pray for them and let them know that you care about them and that you're there for them and that you will always have an ear to listen to them. Because when somebody is in that addiction, they feel alone. They feel like nobody cares about them anymore. You feel like everybody hates you, and I would just say, don't give up.
That feeling can also prevent those struggling with substance use disorder from getting the help they need.
How the country has generally approached addiction, I think, for the most part, we've approached addiction as sort of a moral failure. You're a bad person if you're addicted. It's nothing to do with whether there's an issue in your brain. It's you as a person. And that kind of very judgmental approach has led to, many, many people being arrested, put in jail, put at, risk of overdose and withdrawal. And it's also, hurt many people's lives instead of the alternative, giving people access to treatment where they could actually get better and go on living the lives that they want to live for themselves and their families.
Joshua Sharfstein is a professor of the practice in health policy and management at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. He's also the former health commissioner in Baltimore, a principal deputy commissioner of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, and health secretary of the state of Maryland. On top of that, his wife is an addiction medicine physician, and together they wrote a book titled The Opioid Epidemic: What Everyone Needs to Know.
I think the criminal justice system has many counterproductive effects on people, one of which you just described, which is for someone who really wants to put their life back together, is ready to do things differently, sometimes just having been arrested makes it impossible for them to be successful, and they can't get jobs and they can't get housing, and it's just, a vicious cycle for them.
A vicious cycle trapping millions of Americans, including Jessica Fowl.
I feel like I should be the mother that I know I can be, the wife that I know I can be, the daughter and sister that I know I can be, but I can't pull myself out of it, and it causes me so much shame that a lot of times I dig deeper into the addiction to try to cover it up.
To escape from it, to escape from the feelings of shame.
Yeah.
Jessica opened up about her heartbreaking story on a podcast titled Wife, Mother, and Heroin Addict Shares Her Overdose Story. She spoke with us before serving a prison sentence for a heroin overdose. Unfortunately, this wasn't her first time going to prison for drugs.
Tell me, what kind of counseling, what kind of treatment did you get there?
If you want to see mental health, they really don't have a lot to do with you if you're going to be there for anything less than 6 months. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to help you. They'll tell you in an emergency that you can call them or kite them, but they don't really do anything to adjust any medications or look at those needs that you may have. As far as any treatment, they don't have chemical dependency treatment at all right now, other than MRT, which is a class. They used to do another class, Sabisa, but they don't have the staff to do that right now either, the last time I was there anyway.
So you weren't getting treatment for addiction while you were in there?
No, not at all.
Sharfstein says that lack of treatment can often turn deadly.
When people get out of jail, maybe a few days later, a few weeks later, they still have that brain disease. They're still craving opioids. They go out and maybe use their usual dose, take the same size pill or the same bag of heroin, and they're at risk now because they've lost their tolerance for overdose and death. And so the rate of death among people leaving jails is astronomically high. It's something like 100 times higher than for the general population. And in that first week or so, it's 10 times higher than it'll be even in just a few months. So it is just an incredibly dangerous time.
South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem was on the podcast to talk about what's being done to fight drugs in the state, along with how to provide better treatment for those who are suffering.
In the past, when South Dakota has done stuff, it hasn't been probably comprehensive enough to really turn people's lives around. Most of them are incarcerated not long enough to complete an entire program. So as they say, we get somebody halfway through the program and then they're released. But we could build it out better with an infrastructure that puts those kind of tools in place so that they can continue with that once they're released as well. And looking at other options for alternative treatment. Our drug courts are incredibly helpful. We've had our DUI courts as well. We have a mental health court as well, which is something I think is incredibly important because so many times with a certain population in the state, if they have mental health issues and they don't get the kind of diagnosis or help they need it right away, it ends up in an addictive situation. So those alternative courts are very powerful because it builds in the accountability and it's not necessarily just putting them in prison.
Noem says more than 80% of cases that go through the South Dakota court system deal with drugs.
I just sent a letter to every judge in the state. It's asking them to consider, instead of sentencing juveniles to prison, to consider sending them to programs like Teen Challenge. Teen Challenge is a long-term commitment, but it is something that doesn't just focus on punishment. It focuses on the whole being as an individual and getting counselors and help and people to walk beside you. Now, Teen Challenge a lot of times only take young males. So for young females, we're trying to expand that with them.
Not only does our nation need better treatment and prevention programs, but for many parents, help has not come soon enough. Carol Morris lost 5 children to our nation's drug epidemic. You heard that right. 5 kids.
My first son that died, he was found in the stairwell. We don't.
Joey?
Yeah. The next one that died was Timmy. So him and his friends were speedballing, which is heroin and cocaine together. He overdosed, and the 2 kids he was with just threw him in the other room in the bed and just left him there for 9 hours before they called 911. So rigor mortis had already set in. There was no hope for him. My daughter, Lauren.
And that was in 2007 that you lost Lauren?
Yes, in 2007. Timmy died in 2004. Lauren was in 2007. She just got out of a psychiatric hospital, but while she was in there, one of the patients introduced her to fentanyl patches.
Oh.
She left the hospital on February 28th. They found her dead on the morning of March 2nd. February, she had 28 days. Stephen was heroin. He was in his girlfriend's hallway when they found him.
And then Doug died in your house, huh?
Hell. Doug stood at the top of my stairs. I said, Doug, I think that you were high yesterday. And he said, no, Ma. He says, I'm not. I'm doing good. I love you. He gave me a kiss, gave me a hug. I walked downstairs.
And 10 minutes later, her son, Doug, died.
I cry a lot. I'm sure you do. I have anxiety when I stopped going to malls because I would see someone that would be built like my child or walk like my child. So I no longer do that. I no longer do the things that make me think more of them. The other day I cooked noodles for dinner, which is the first time since my son Doug died. And of course he loved noodles. On Thanksgiving I made stuffing, homemade stuffing, and he loved that. That was very hard to do. So all those things trigger a lot of anxiety and depression.
Morris says substance use disorder runs in her family. Her children's father battled alcohol addiction. Dr. Nzinga Harrison, who specialized in addiction treatment, says genetics, along with several other factors, play a huge role in whether or not you develop substance use disorder.
Depression is a risk factor for addiction. Anxiety is a risk factor for addiction. Not having a friend group, not belonging, is a risk factor for addiction. Your family history biologically is a risk factor for addiction. Addictive type behaviors around anything, sugar, thrill seeking, all of that's running through dopamine. And so it's giving us an idea of how your dopamine system functions. And we can use that as early insights so that we can practice prevention.
Dr. Harrison says prevention could save millions of lives. But first, we need to start treating addiction as the disease it is.
So why is it, do you think it's so hard for people to accept that? I mean, to accept that addiction is a disease of the brain, to accept it's a disease like diabetes or heart disease that's hereditary. Why is it so hard?
I think because the symptoms of addiction are feelings and thoughts and behaviors. And in this country, we conceptualize the way you think, the way you feel, the way you interact with others as who you are, right? It's hard to conceptualize those as symptoms. And so it's substance use disorders and addiction are devastating, as you know, right? They steal people from us. Before they steal our people from us, it becomes very painful. But isn't the same true for Alzheimer's? Isn't the same true for cancer, right?
Yes.
Like it just makes it so painful to be with your loved one as that disease progresses, and then that disease steals you from us. But it's much easier for me to see weight loss as a symptom than it is to see anger.
While there are risk factors for substance use disorder, the disease doesn't impact just a particular race, gender, or socioeconomic class.
I always say we're like the poster family for addiction. It's like, I'm a social worker, my husband's a physician. We talked, we had family meals, we talked about everything, very open.
That's Sarah Crosby, who we talked to in an episode called Loving My Son Through Heroin Addiction. Sarah is a trained social worker, but nothing could have prepared her for the treacherous journey of her son's addiction.
We both had children that had every opportunity and came from good homes, so to speak. Yet they both started using marijuana and other drugs at a very young age and progressed on to even harder drugs, which nobody can really understand exactly why this happens.
Well, I think it's certainly incredibly complex, and there are many theories out there. I do think that it happens with particularly highly sensitive people who are prone to anxiety and or depression. And Cameron certainly has our generational anxiety. There's a lot of anxiety that runs through my family. And for a person who has high anxiety, I think that particularly opioids become like a hug for them.
That high had Cameron in a downward spiral for 15 years. Thankfully, he is now in recovery, but it hasn't come without so many worries, tears, and years spent trying to find treatment that would work.
It has to do with society again. It has to do with what is taught in school. How do these kids feel about themselves? Are we paying attention as a society to the sensitivity? Are we teaching kids the joy and process of living and learning, or are we just teaching them to a test, to, the end result? And I think that for kids who are highly sensitive, they oftentimes don't fit in that nice little neat box. And people need to attach. People want to belong. And if you, oftentimes when working with teenagers, I find that they change themselves to fit in because it gives them a sense of belonging, but they're really just losing themselves.
I think most of us do that, and I don't think I stopped doing that until I hit like 50 years old. So
yeah, there's great comfort in hitting above 50.
I do think like there's a lot of parents that are at the point, where I was 7 years ago, or you were 15 years ago, just struggling and looking for answers. And I have a lot of parents reach out to me and they ask me what to do as if I'm the expert on it. And I always say, if I were the expert on it, my child would still be alive. But I don't always feel like I have really good advice to offer.
I think that you need to take care of yourself first. That's number one. You need to see a therapist, go to a group, talk to people, talk to everyone. Don't let the shame keep you from talking. Advocate for your child within the schools. See what teachers are thinking, how they feel, how is your kid doing. Just really don't be afraid to advocate for them. Don't be afraid to talk to them. And yes, if they're doing drugs, they're going to lie and pull away, and your relationship will be completely and absolutely on the rocks. I would do as much research as possible and try to reach out to specialists in this area. There are some really, really good therapists. There's some decent groups. And above all, when your kid is still a kid and under your roof, your job is to keep them safe. And as much as is under your control to keep them alive. It's a little different when they leave your home and they're adults and you really have no control at all. But again, I think you do the best when you take care of yourself first. Your kids tend to be better. And I think there's a lot to be said with changing the dance with them. And by that I mean they will pull you in to their circle of their addicted brain and how it circle talks and how it makes excuses and this and that. And what we all want to do, and what I did a ton of, was I would jump right into that circle and get caught up in that circle talk and end up arguing and begging and pleading, and that doesn't work. So if you look at changing your behavior and your reactions and when they reach out to pull you into their dance, for you not to take their hand and dance. And if you change your reaction, oftentimes what will happen is they have to change the way they're relating to you.
Oftentimes, parents try everything they can to help their child who is struggling with addiction, and nothing works. The pull of the drug is just too strong.
I was so desperate, and I tried so hard, and like I still lost him. And Logan wanted to get clean too, so that's what's so sad.
Logan Williams' death got international attention. The teen actor made a name for himself playing the young Barry Allen on the CW series The Flash. He also secretly struggled with an opioid addiction for 3 years. His mom, Marlise, tried to get him help, even remortgaging her home to send her son to treatment centers. Despite that, Logan died from fentanyl poisoning at just 16.
Now he's gone, and he started really telling me, I don't want to be this person. Like, I don't know what's wrong with me. I don't want to be like this, Mom. Like, why am I doing this? And the shame and the stigma that you feel fighting this fight.
That shame and stigma has unfortunately continued even after Logan's death.
I've had some negative feedback regarding his career, and people say, well, he should have never gone into acting. And I can honestly say it had nothing to do with it. It was something he loved doing and he was good at. He told me towards the end of his life that his happiest times were acting, being on set, and he really enjoyed it because it came natural to him too. He was a really good actor. I am so kind of really irritated and sick of being parent shamed for my child being an addict, because I look back and I go, what did I do wrong? I mean, I got a job that I could be with him, and so that I could pick him up from school. I spent quality time with him. My parents have a great relationship with Logan, and he, you start going through all these things, and then I just stopped and realized, you know what? If love could have saved him, he'd be living forever.
Marlise is carrying on Logan's legacy by talking about her son's struggles despite the criticism. She hopes by raising awareness in Logan's honor, she'll prevent other children from dying.
For a long time, I wasn't sure if I should, because I was aware that there would be a lot of negative feedback, and I didn't want it to tarnish my beautiful boy's image of, especially even young kids that love The Flash or any of the shows he was on. I was very, very concerned about it, but then in a way I had this need where I felt if I don't say something, if Logan, I felt like I don't want my son to die in vain. And he created a small spotlight on his life from his little short-lived acting career. And so now I just felt that I am really wanting to use that spotlight and create a legacy and turn this, hopefully this, at least create a conversation about the stigma, some of the laws that need to be changed, and this fentanyl that's on the streets, that it's a massacre against our children. I mean, you do realize, Angela, if Emily and Logan were born 30 years ago, they'd be living, and that's what's so scary is why are we getting attacked? What about the distributors and the dealers of dealing with this fentanyl and knowingly killing people? And it's just so mind-boggling that we're getting attacked for our character or our children's character, who actually were the greatest people.
You're absolutely correct. I mean, it's sickening to think, because we used to think these things were just a rite of passage. They'll grow out of it. Certain kids just lose their way, but they find their way back. But there is no time with fentanyl on the market to find your way back to who you are or who you're supposed to be.
I believe my son was murdered, and I feel
he was.
Yes. And if Logan was, let's put it this way. If Logan was given rat poison, there would be a murder investigation. He was given fentanyl. He didn't even know, pure fentanyl he died from. And there's no, the dealer on the street, unfortunately, I have inside information, is still dealing, and he has killed 8 people to date.
Oh my goodness.
This particular individual is, knowingly he's not an addict. He's dealing fentanyl. He knows he's dealing fentanyl. People are dying. He knows he killed Logan, and he doesn't care.
Unfortunately, that story is becoming all too common. Many of our country's opioid overdose deaths involve fentanyl.
When I arrived at the house, they'd already had pronounced him dead, and everybody was on the driveway when I got to the house. And Chris, his father, just said, our baby is gone. My other 2 kids helped me up in the shock of it all.
Laura Didier's 17-year-old son, Zach, bought what he thought was a Percocet pill via Snapchat. It actually was 100% fentanyl. Her son, who was a stellar student and set to start UCLA in the fall, was now dead.
All that potential he missed out. It's like he laid the groundwork for this beautiful future that he never got to see.
Didier believes this was only the second time Zach had experimented with illegal drugs.
With opioids, sometimes it's one slip and it's fatal. I think they're playing on the street, they're playing Russian roulette every time they buy, because you don't know. You don't know what you're getting.
It's not just drug overdoses and fentanyl poisoning that can lead to death among those who struggle with substance use disorder. According to multiple studies, more than half of all suicides are associated with dependence on drugs and alcohol.
She was beautiful. She had a master's degree. She was smart. She had so much given to her.
Carrie Peluso's daughter, Samantha, was a gifted artist and a great teacher, but she also struggled with heroin addiction in secret.
We both did the Anonymous People, which was a group that originally started to reduce the stigma, and they had done a movie that came out. And Sam had went on Facebook and she wrote about that it almost killed her. And she took it down like a minute later, and she's just like, I can't put it out there because, you know, in Georgia, she's applying for teaching jobs in small towns. And she's like, I won't be able to get a job. And teachers, what people don't know, have to get their contract renewed every single year. So even if you got a job and you had the job, they may not renew your contract for no reason at all. They don't have to give you a reason for not renewing your contract.
Samantha, or as her family called her, Sam, struggled with the shame that too often comes with addiction.
Who's going to want me? I'm a drug addict.
And at the age of 30, she took her own life.
And she led the mental health awareness and suicide prevention programs at the 2 schools she worked at. And she even at her funeral, we asked if there was anyone who wanted to get up and speak, and a student got up and spoke, and she said, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Sam. She saved me because she was going to take her own life.
Even though stories like that have helped Sam's family heal, Carrie says there's no pain like that of losing a child.
It's not just me being hurt. I had to watch now my son, you know, he has to live without a sibling, and he's living with horrible pain. And his wife, he just got married. They had the wedding without her. His wife was best friends with my daughter. So I had to watch them, who I love dearly, go through so much pain. I have to watch my husband. I saw him cry 3 times before. We've been married 34 years. I couldn't even count the times I've seen him cry, you know, and it's just because it's just so tremendous. When you say what helped me the most, I've heard people say this and it sounds like, oh gosh, how, you know, and at times I've thought, well, how could it be? But gratefulness. I mean, I think about, and even close to the beginning, I thought about, what if I'd never had children? What if I'd never known Sam? What if she was only meant to be here for 30 years? You know, some say people come down to learn or whatever. Or I would never or not want to be her mother. I would never not have children because this could happen. And if she could only be here for 30 years, I would a billion times over choose to have been her mother with everything that happened. Because it was precious time. And I am so thankful that I had that time with her.
Throughout this podcast, we not only want to raise awareness about our nation's drug epidemic, we also want to be a resource for the millions of people grieving after losing a loved one.
We need to do grief work, and there's no better explanation to it. We have to put time and energy into grieving.
Mark Vandebroek is a board-certified music therapist and thanatologist, which is a death and grief expert.
Death ends a life, not a relationship.
Vandebroek has worked with more than 100,000 people on their grief journeys, including politicians and professional athletes. I also benefited from his guidance after Emily's death.
What I inevitably try to do is help people reconnect with their loved ones, not in a supernatural way.
Not like voodoo or spiritual or
but
mediums or things like that.
Right. I look at it that if we connect with them, if we really listen to our heart, we know that their presence is there.
I would agree with that. I hear my daughter's voice, and sometimes I think I'm crazy.
But no, that's great. Because you're going to hear what they're going to say. If there's questions, unresolved differences, whatever might be going on, you still can have that conversation. In all my years of work, I have found that we miss our loved ones physically being here, but we miss talking to them more than anything else in the world. We miss hearing their voice, what they say, what they do. Yeah. If we really truly listen, we will know.
Vandebroek says writing notes to your lost loved one can also bring healing. For one grieving mother, those notes came in the form of a song. Sally Ponzio lost her 26-year-old son Travis to overdose in 2016. 6 months later, she was driving in her car when she heard an unmistakable voice in her heart.
And I'm sure you understand, Angela, that during this time period, you don't want to be alone much or in your head too much because it's a very tough time to be alone. And so it was my first time really alone in a car ride for, 2.5, 3 hours. And it was tough to be with myself. So I was just driving, and all of a sudden, I felt a presence. I felt words coming to me. And I always travel with food and stuff, so I had napkins next to me. And I can't even explain it until I realized that it was my son. I cannot rhyme anything together, so I knew it wasn't me. And he was giving me words.
I started writing the words that you were saying on a napkin in my car. I had to pull over. I'll never get over. Now that you're gone.
I pulled over, as the song says, and I started writing the words down on that napkin, and that is actually a picture of the napkin that we use in the song, in the video. And I just started scribbling words, and he was changing them and putting them back, and you can see in one of them, I'm making an arrow, move this here. And it was the best ride of my life. I mean, spending 3 hours in the car with him. I didn't even want to stop to have to go to the bathroom because I thought I would lose him.
After the car ride, Sally told her musician brother Frank about her experience. Frank, along with singer-songwriter Eleanor Dubinsky, took the words and put them to music.
Eleanor sings it like it happened to her. And so it's through me, through her, that she's singing, and that's how it feels.
You said, I'm alive in your broken heart. Let my love lift you. Start a new start. Fly high.
When they started putting it together, we had a great experience because we went to Joe's Pub in New York City, and I flew into New York. And at that point, they did it live for the first time in front of me. And it was powerful. The audience was taken by it. The reaction was amazing. We did not know that some of the singers had similar stories that all came out. People in the audience, we know 1 out of every 3 people are affected by addiction right now and overdosing. And people really came to us and approached us.
We talked to Sally, Frank, and Eleanor on the podcast.
I've really learned over time with this song and other experiences, when you put something to music and people can sing it, it's healing.
You can hear more of their song, Remember Me, at the end of this podcast. But we also don't want to forget that one of the most important things we're working on at Emily's Hope is prevention, so that children never start experimenting with drugs in the first place. One of the ways we're doing that is by educating students by developing a prevention education curriculum for students in grades K through 12.
The best preventions are talk early and talk often. I swear to parents, I promise, the more you talk about this stuff, the easier it gets. It's sort of like, Peggy Orenstein, who wrote the wonderful books, Boys and Sex and Girls and Sex. We joke all the time that, when it comes to difficult conversations, actually, the more often you have them, the easier they become. It's something we talk about a lot in our home. But early talk often, listen to your kids, don't talk from a place of judgment. And then on top of that, there are things like early intervention. We know some of the other risk factors separate from genetics and trauma, adverse childhood experiences are academic failure is a really big one. And so getting there early, intervening early, undiagnosed learning issues. There were always kids in my classroom with undiagnosed or barely treated learning issues. Social ostracism is a big risk factor for kids, and you can see how these things can become intertwined really easily. When a child is aggressive towards other children, we need to deal with that at a very early age because that is a big risk factor. Physical and sexual abuse is a huge risk factor. It's one of the biggest risk factors for kids. And so we need to believe kids when they tell us that they're, if they're being made uncomfortable by someone else's behavior. So there are all sorts of, and then there are risk periods as well. For example, transitions for kids. The transition between middle and high school is a big risky time for kids. So understanding what those risk factors are, having a very clear eye about them, not getting freaked out and defensive and, feeling guilty or shame, and then moving forward from a place of, okay, so we know this is a risk factor. Let's deal with it.
We talked with Jessica Leahy on a recent podcast. She's a mother and teacher and New York Times bestselling author. Jessica, who has been sober for 8 years after battling alcohol addiction, also wrote a new book about protecting children from substance use disorder.
We're talking about adolescent brains here. We're not talking about adult brains. We're talking about brains that are not done developing until, the early 20s. And all of these things, when you think about the stuff about your teenager that really tends to piss you off, like, not being able to remember stuff or not being able to, hold 3 things in their head at the same time or blowing off deadlines or, that sort of stuff. That's all the stuff that's developing during adolescence. And if we want our kids to get to their early 20s with their brains intact, this is really important that we delay with substances, because substances that can be low to moderate risk in an adult brain can be moderate to high risk in an adolescent brain. And then the last bit of this is the longer we delay a kid's use, the lower their lifelong risk for developing substance use disorder becomes. So there's all kinds of reasons that delay is the name of the game.
While more people are becoming aware of the drug crisis in our country, there's so much more work that needs to be done. Last year, we saw another record year of overdose deaths, about 80% of those from fentanyl. Unfortunately, I don't have to look far to see the devastation. On one of my podcasts, I told you about how even after Emily's death, some of her friends didn't heed the warning and get help for their substance use disorder.
But I'm also taking this very personally because 2 of Emily's friends, the group that she hung out with and did drugs with, and people that she's known since she was in high school, 2 of them overdosed as well in the last couple of weeks. Now, both of them basically died, but were brought back by 2 doses of Narcan. So those kids are alive. One is a guy, he's 22 years old, and one is a girl, and she's 22 as well. And I had heard their names. Emily had mentioned their names quite a bit. The first one I'll just call Jake. I had heard about Jake, and in fact, some of Emily's friends had left a birthday card, her niche where her ashes are held, and I saw that Jake had signed it. And the other friend I'll call Katie, and I'd heard Katie's name mentioned over and over and over again, and she also overdosed as well, just this last week. And I think I start taking it really personally because I would hope that the friends of Emily's who know that she died would somehow have cleaned up their act, right? Gotten treatment, gotten better, and stayed away from this. But they haven't been able to, and it makes me so sad.
It also saddens me to hear from other parents whose children have either died or are struggling with substance use disorder. But I honestly believe by speaking out, we can stop the stigma and raise more awareness about this very critical issue. And that brings me back to my very first podcast, where I shared a poem I had written after Emily's death. It is named Incomplete Heart. While my heart will always be incomplete, the guests on this podcast have helped me reshape it and find a new sense of purpose. And for that, I'm incredibly grateful.
I am here, she is not. Yet I must stay and figure out how to put her away, when she's always been right here at the forefront of my mind. Worry, fear, worst fear now materialized. Somehow I breathe, in and out, in and out. I breathe without her. I was there for her first breath, but not her last. My work unfinished, services no longer required. My heart in pieces on the floor, one piece missing forevermore. Learning to live with an incomplete heart.
And that wraps up our 100th episode of Grieving Out Loud. I want to thank all of my loyal listeners for helping make this podcast among the most listened to on the topic of fentanyl poisoning, grief, and addiction. We have many great episodes coming up, including next week, where I interview the founder of Shatterproof, Gary Mendel, and he opens up about the struggles with his son that led him to his life mission of ending the stigma of addiction. Until next time, wishing you faith, hope, and courage.
I started writing the words that you were saying on a napkin in my car. I had to pull over. I'll never get over. Now that you're gone, you said, I'm alive in your broken heart. Let my love lift you, start a new start. Fly high, fly free, spread your wings, remember me. Fly high, fly free, spread your wings, remember me. When you were born, I held you in my arms. When did your tears become ambulance alarms? Gone for years before you went away. I tried so hard to reach you, you couldn't stay. These leather seats hold me down to the earth. A child, my child, should not go first. Fly high, fly free, spread your wings, remember me. Fly high, fly free, spread your wings, remember me. His name is your name, her face is your face. My tears all these years cannot be replaced. But this song is our song, our love, our strength. We never said goodbye. Fly high, fly free, spread your wings, remember me. Fly
Thank you for joining me for this latest edition of Grieving Out Loud. If you're enjoying the podcast, please consider giving a positive review. Wishing you faith, hope, and courage.